Alberta Primetime with Michael Higgins.
Welcome to Alberta Primetime. Ahead tonight, our politics panel on the election of a new speaker for the Alberta legislature. But first, an Albertan in the federal cabinet.
I, Eleanor Angela Olszewski, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Emergency Management and Community Resilience and Minister responsible for Prairie's Economic Development, Canada.
New Edmonton MP Eleanor Olszewski being sworn in to cabinet this morning, one of 24 new faces in Prime Minister Mark Carney's new inner circle, the PM, framing it as a leaner and more focused cabinet. Joining us now, Sabrina Grover, a Liberal strategist, former Liberal candidate in Calgary-Centre. Sabrina, good to see you. Welcome back.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a big day.
It is indeed, and Alberta does factor into the equation. Let me ask you first, though, how do you weigh the balance of new faces with the old guard? What message is the Prime Minister sending with the makeup of this cabinet?
I think a really good influx of new faces to the cabinet, but faces that may be new to politics and maybe new to this cabinet, but aren't new to their portfolios in terms of their skills and their depth and their experience. I think, Prime Minister Carney had a lot of really good choices in terms of the new folks who were elected. And I'm sure that it was a tough choice in coming into some of these decisions, but really strong cabinet, really deep, I think, knowledge and experience of understanding on their files.
Now, how far does this cabinet go in distancing the Carney government from the cloud of disdain that hung over the Trudeau Liberals?
I think it does a really good job of distancing itself overall. I think there's some key portfolios that we've seen Trudeau-era ministers retain. So, for example, things like, finance is staying with FPC with Philippe Francois Champagne. You have foreign affairs staying with the Trudeau-era minister, Anita Anand. We see Dominic LeBlanc retain his role in Canada-U.S. relations and intergovernmental affairs. But I think that it's hard for Canadians to necessarily be upset at those choices because those are such strong performers in their roles, and they did so well in their roles that they had previously that I think that, it's welcomed maybe to see some stability. And certainly you can't have a cabinet of entirely new ministers if you've got some veterans to choose from, because you do need some of that institutional knowledge to actually have cabinet function well.
Now, where regional representation is concerned, to what degree is this a unity cabinet?
I think there's some hits and misses. I think obviously a strong inclusion of Quebec ministers, which is important, a good representation from Quebec, especially considering that Quebec is going to have a provincial election later on this year, and there are some sovereignty and unity questions coming up in that province. I think a good inclusion of new folks and new faces from BC, which is important. I think with, beyond that, the prairies, it's a little bit light touch, but looking to the north, there's some interesting inclusions. Rebecca Alty is an example, former mayor of Yellowknife. I think that's a really important role for her in Crown Indigenous Affairs. So there's some good choices here, and I think that there's some good balance of regional voices.
On that light touch where the prairies are concerned, one Alberta MP named to a portfolio, emergency management, community resilience, and Prairie's Economic Development, Canada. What do you make of Edmonton's Eleanor Olszewski being a fit?
Well, congratulations to an Alberta homegrown talent. So really excited to see Eleanor in there. I do think it was a bit of a misstep to leave Corey Hogan out of cabinet from Calgary. We haven't seen a minister from Calgary specifically since I think maybe 2017. So a long time without representation for what I would deem as Alberta's economic engine. And, certainly from a business interest, certainly from a natural resources and energy interest, Calgary really does hold a lot of those networks and connections. So it will be interesting to see how the Minister of Energy, Tim Hodgson, deals with Alberta and manages to build, new bridges and new relationships. But I do think, a bit of a loss to not have a Calgary minister.
Well, now, how do you see this cabinet responding to Alberta's lengthy list of concerns and the notable rise in separatist sentiments?
So I think that Prime Minister Carney has been very reasonable and very open-minded when it comes to negotiating with the province, when it comes to negotiating with the Premier. But one of the things that I think is important is to not get hung up solely on Alberta's voice coming from the office of the Premier. 70% of Albertans are not in favor of separation or a referendum on separation. And so I think it's important for the Carney government, new MPs, new ministers, to reach out and dig in and find those voices, including those voices that might be in business. The separation agreement or argument really hurts business interests in Alberta and in Canada. I think it creates a lot of instability in investment environments. And so I think that it's an opportunity for the government federally to think about what does create stability and how to kind of overcome some of those pieces and maybe that rhetoric that the Premier is continuing to lay out.
All right. Now, Parliament resumes sitting in less than 2 weeks' time. Canada welcomes the world's leaders for the G7 summit in K Country in mid-June. Mark Carney has promised the removal of interprovincial trade barriers by July 1st. And of course, there's still the threat of Trump tariffs hanging overhead. How much pressure is this new cabinet going to be under to perform?
Well, certainly, I think that honeymoon period is going to be short and sweet because they have a lot of work to get to and a lot of work to get to right away. And you've already seen a lot of that work happen, right? Last week with the first meeting between Donald Trump and Prime Minister Carney. So I think that it's important for that to remain the focus, but also to show that domestic strengthening. I think that's why roles like Chrystia Freeland and Dominic LeBlanc are important in terms of those internal trade barriers in Canada that we've said we're going to take down by July 1st. I think housing and infrastructure, a huge commitments came out of the campaign during the last couple of weeks on that. And I think putting Gregor Robertson in that role and seeing how quickly we can actually move on these housing and infrastructure priorities will be important. So I think there's a good balance of both like geopolitical and international things that the government's going to have to deal with while also dealing with local pieces. And then lastly, we host a G7 in just over a month. And so what does it look like, for the government to head into that, and what are the priorities and outcomes they'd like to see?
Yeah, and Alberta right in the middle of that one as well. Okay, we'll have to leave it there. Appreciate getting your perspective this evening, Sabrina. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Sabrina Grover is a Liberal strategist and a former Liberal candidate in Calgary-Centre.